For more then on South Africa's prospect of success at the International Court of Justice, we're joined tonight by Wits University Law School visiting Professor Mia Swart. A very good evening to you, Professor. Grateful for your time on Newzroom Afrika tonight. Is the South African government right to be confident of its legal case against Israel?
Yes, good evening. I believe that it is appropriate to be positive at this stage. The fact that the case is being heard so quickly already bodes well. And, it's a very carefully prepared application, and I believe we have the law on our side.
And let's talk about the law and why this court is perhaps the most, or one of the most appropriate forums for this case to be heard.
Right, so the ICJ is a particularly appropriate forum for two reasons. The one is that it's a very authoritative court. It carries a lot of weight because it is the most senior legal organ in the United Nations system. Secondly, it's just, this involves the Genocide Convention, which is a convention that has been signed by 153 states. So, this is a convention that has been neglected for many years, but I believe that, this is the time to really show that the Genocide Convention means something.
Mm. And having looked at the case that South Africa has put forward, in the main, what it wants quite immediately is an end to the bombardment of Gaza. Israel says it's bombing Gaza because it wants to basically wipe out the armed group Hamas. But as we've seen, thousands of innocent people, including women and children, have been killed in the process. Do you expect that at the court, the South African government will most likely be granted everything that it is seeking, because that is not the only demand it's made?
That's right. 9 provisional measures have been asked for, including a cessation of military action, cessation of genocidal acts. It's also been asked that evidence not be destroyed, pointing to genocide. A whole host of measures have been asked for, including returning Palestinians to their homes, because we know that something like 1.9 Palestinians living in Gaza have now been displaced. So another reason why the ICJ is such an appropriate forum is because it provides for this urgent mechanism, which is quite unique in international adjudication, because the South African government and our lawyers simply argued that, this is a case of extraordinary urgency since, people are dying, many Palestinians are dying by the day.
And what about the argument that's been made by Israel and even supported in the last 24 hours by the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, basically calling South Africa's case here meritless, because some of what's gone on has been an attempt basically to undo the argument for genocide. So if you can take us through perhaps what the court will look into in determining whether indeed we've seen genocidal actions unfold in Gaza. What will be the bar for that determination to be made?
Right, so it's entirely predictable that Israel would oppose this. This is quite obvious. That in itself doesn't mean much. The judges will simply look at the wording of the Genocide Convention. The fact that the case has already been admitted could point to a prima facie case of genocide, and it will look specifically at the definition of genocide and special intent, or specific intent, which lies at the core of the definition of genocide. Here one has to look at pronouncements made by senior Israeli officials, the top brass of Netanyahu and Netanyahu himself, referring to, we know that the defense minister referred to Palestinians as human animals. We know that there was talk of children of darkness and children of light. We know that Palestinians have been referred to as bloodthirsty monsters. So in all these ways, Israel has actually helped, the case against them by so clearly indicating their intention to raise Gaza from the ground, to kill, and then in fact also killing and, inflicting conditions on a group aimed at its destruction, which is also part of the Genocide Convention, inflicting, impossible conditions of life on a group, such as destroying schools, universities, churches, mosques. This has also happened. So some have actually described this as a textbook case of genocide. On so many levels, we see genocide.
And Mia, let's talk consequences for a moment. If indeed this case does go against the state of Israel or the court rules in favor of the South African government, what is the worst that could happen for Israel? Because, again, as has been said, especially in the last 3 weeks, the issue of enforceability is perhaps the biggest problem with whatever the court will decide.
That is correct. And Israel has shown in the past that it wouldn't necessarily adhere to ICJ orders. A very crisp and clear example of this is the 2004 advisory opinion on the separation wall in Israel, where the ICJ very clearly instructed Israel to dismantle that wall. It said it was a violation of international law, and Israel simply ignored the order. So we know that the Security Council can step in and ask for enforcement, ask Israel to, for example, stop bombing Gaza. And I think this is going to be the most interesting thing, is to see, what the Security Council will do, what measures it will take, because it can even, authorize military power, in terms of forcing enforcement. But in my opinion, this is highly unlikely because of the United States' presence on the Security Council.
And on the idea or the demand that basically the ICJ instruct Israel to cease hostilities, how much of a complication would it be to actually end fighting when you consider that while South Africa and Israel are bound by international law, Hamas, for example, does not have the same signatory status. It's not a country, for example, or the leadership of a country in terms of the technicalities around the framework that governs nations that are bound by the laws that are now going to be used in deciding this matter. Is that a complication at all?
I don't see this as a complication. This is simply, about Israel's stopping the bombing, calling a ceasefire, and I very much doubt that Hamas will break this.
And after this, Mia, I wonder if this has potential in any way. I know we've been speaking to you about the law, but if this has potential in any way, perhaps to even reshape global diplomacy, at least as far as the countries and the ways in which they've chosen to align themselves, South Africa and others, the Arab states in the main deciding to stick or stand by the Palestinians, America, much of Europe choosing to align with Israel. Is that what we're likely to see post all of this?
Right. So my hope is that it would not be as polarizing as you're describing, that, America will sort of come to its senses, if you will, and, work to get Israel to stop the bombing. I do think that there are, reasonable people everywhere, also people who have participated in the global protests against this violence, who support the Palestinians, even if they find themselves in the West or in Europe. So I hope that it is not a stark polarization, but that ultimately, it's a human matter and a matter concerning freedom and freedoms that we should all be enjoying, that Palestinians have been deprived of for decades.
Mia Swart, visiting professor at Wits University. Good to have your time. Thank you so much for speaking to us on News at Prime.